أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين لا سيما مولانا وسيدي صاحب العصر والزمان روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء وأجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف ولعنة دائمة على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين ما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. For the hastening of the advent of our 12th Imam, Imam Al-Hujjah, one loud salawat upon Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. My dear brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First off, I want to begin by extending my congratulations to all of the brothers and sisters who are here tonight as we gather to mark the birth anniversary of the 8th Imam of the family of Ali Muhammad, Imam Ali ibn Musa Ar-Ridha alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to have the ability to make his ziyarat in this world, and that we are also given the ability to have the shafaat, the intercession of Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam on the day of judgment. We ask Allah also to give us the ability to have the ziyarat, to perform the ziyarat of all of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam. Let us recite one more salawat upon Muhammad and Ali Muhammad for the ability to make the ziyarat of Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salatu wassalam. Out of all of the Imams that we have from the Ahlul Bayt, the 12 Imams, and from the 14 Ma'asumeen, we see that obviously each and every one of these 14 infallibles has a unique characteristic or something unique about each and every one of them. Out of all of them, for example, we know that Sayyid al-Shuhada, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, occupies a very prominent position within the history of Islam. We know that when we look at the ziyarat of Sayyid al-Shuhada, that his grave is a place where our prayers can be accepted. We are told that out of all of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, of all of the Ma'asumeen in fact, that the turba, the dirt from his grave is a means of shafaat, a means of a cure, which we don't see with any of the other infallibles, alayhimus salam. And when we look at all of the infallibles, we see something or another unique about each and every one of them, as we have been told within the hadith. And when we look at the 8th Imam, Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam, we see also many unique characteristics, many unique aspects and facets of his life that are not there within the other Imams. And inshallah this evening I want to look at one particular hadith from the 8th Imam, a very practical hadith in terms of how you and I can lead our lives in this busy, fast-paced world that we live in. How do we manage our time according to the teachings of Ali Muhammad alayhimus salam? But before I go to that tradition, let us learn a bit more about our 8th Imam. Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam, as many of his forefathers, was born in the city of Medina on the 11th of Dhul-Qa'adah in the year 148 after the Hijrah. As we know, his father was the 7th Imam, and his mother, as with many of our Imams, has a very unique history. You know, when we study the lives of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, one of the things that we see is that when they came to marriage, that they didn't limit themselves to only their particular culture. And I've spoken about this before, but we see with the 8th Imam as well that his mother didn't come from a noble Arab tribe, as other people might think. Actually, the mother of the Imam, according to some of the traditions, was a woman who was bought was in slavery. She was purchased, she was freed, and she came from the region of Africa, from North or Eastern Africa. And so this is something which we see unique in the lives of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, that when it came to actually living the teachings of Islam, to remove discrimination, to remove any form of bigotry and nepotism within the society, that they became the first individuals to be able to implement the verses of the Quran within their day-to-day life. So the 8th Imam is born in Medina, and we know that he's given many different titles. We know that one of the main prominent, most well-known titles of the 8th Imam is Ar-Ridha. Ar-Ridha meaning one who is pleased, one who is content. But how does this fit with Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam, with Ali ibn Musa? Well, when we ask his son, Imam Jawad, who would come later on, when the 9th Imam was asked, why is your father called Al-Ridha, the one who is content, the one who is pleased? First off, let me just mention before I go to the explanation, that when we look at the names of the 12 Imams and all their titles, for example, Imam Ali is Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam al-Hassan is al-Mujtaba, Hussein is Shaheed Karbala, and so on and so forth, that these were actually names and titles, distinctions given to our Imams directly by Rasulullah. So well before the Imams came into existence, many years, obviously 140 years before the 8th Imam is born, Rasulullah comes forth and he has a tradition in which he gives us each of the 12 Imams' names and their titles. And so this was a title bestowed upon Imam Ar-Ridha by Rasulullah directly. And when the 9th Imam would come on the scene and he would ask, or people would ask him, why is your father called Ar-Ridha? What does it mean that he's content, or he's well pleased, or he's pleased? He would give the explanation that at the pinnacle, Allah was pleased with him. And so he has the title of Ar-Ridha, because Allah had pleasure and contentment in what the 8th Imam would want from Allah. But then the 9th Imam would say that the Messenger of Allah and all the previous Imams also had contentment with Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam, and therefore he's also known as Ridha because of that. And last but not least, the 9th Imam would tell us that at the time of the 8th Imam, when he was alive, both his friends and his enemies, they all looked to him as a point and a source of guidance. They all knew that he was also one who was content. He had this trait of ridayat, of contentment with Allah. And they were also pleased and content and happy with the 8th Imam. And because of this fact that believers in him and those who rejected his authority, his walayat, because all of them across the board had that same admiration and love and respect for the 8th Imam, so they also referred to him as Ar-Ridha. And so we see that this was, although a title given to him by Allah, through the Messenger of Allah, but every one of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, all of those who loved Imam Ar-Ridha, and even those who didn't accept his authority, his walaya, his mastership, they also recognize him as being Ar-Ridha, the one who was content, the one who was pleased, the one who was satisfied with whatever he was given in the way of Allah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. It's interesting also that one of the titles that he's known by is Gharib. Gharib in the Arabic language, contrary to what it means in Urdu. In Arabic, Gharib is the one who is a stranger, one who is alone. And when you look at why he is called Gharib al-Ghuraba, the one who is the absolute stranger. One of the reasons our scholars tell us that the 8th Imam is called Gharib al-Ghuraba, which is not just a title that we refer to him as, but actually in one of the ziyarat, one of the visitations that we recite when we go to Mashhad, which is actually a compilation of 7 different hadith about Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam, beginning with Rasulullah, we refer to him in the ziyarat as Al-Gharib. And when you look at that, and you look at a map of the Middle East, and where the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhum as-salam are buried, it becomes evident why he's Gharib, why is he a stranger? Because when you go to Medina, when we go for the Hajj, and we complete the Hajj by going to Medina to visit Rasulullah and the family of Rasul, and the respectable companions of Rasulullah and the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhum as-salam, you are able to pay your respects to Rasulullah. You're able to give our respects to Lady Zahra alayha salam. We have 4 Imams buried in Jannatul Baqi. So although they are separated with the other Imams, but still they're together, at least in Jannatul Baqi. When we look at the other Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhum as-salam, when you travel eastwards, when you get to the land of Iraq, we have Amir al-Mu'mineen, we have Sayyid al-Shuhada, we have the 7th Imam, the 9th Imam, the 10th Imam, the 11th Imam. We have So many of these noble personalities that although they are separated by cities within Iraq, but still more or less they're within that country. But when you look at the map and you look at the 14 Masumin, you realize that one of them is way far away in the land of Iran, in what is the province of Khorasan, which is the 8th Imam. And so because he is so far detached away from the rest of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, and the lovers of Imam Ar-Ridha have to make an extra special trip to make it to his ziyarah. Because of this reason, our scholars tell us this laqab, this title of Gharib, is apt and applicable for him because he is indeed a stranger. Despite the fact that millions of people visit his shrine every year, tens of thousands are there on a day-to-day basis in Mashhad. But because he is so distanced from the rest of the Ahlul Bayt, that is why we refer to him as Gharib al-Ghuraba. He is that stranger, the one who is left alone, the one who has been desolate from the rest of the family. And even that event, I'll just mention very briefly of the event of how the Imam gets to Mashhad. Because again, when you study the lives of the Ahlul Bayt, you get to understand and appreciate not only why they are buried in certain places, but this will hopefully lead us to reflect and begin to analyze the political history of what was happening at the time of the Imams. Sometimes history is a bit boring, it's a bit dull. People don't like to read history. We'd rather wait for the miniseries to come on TV to watch it. So rather than reading the story of Yusuf in the Quran, we wait for Iran to make a movie of Nabi Yusuf, and we'll rather watch that. And with the Imams, we'll do the same thing. But it's important for us, although history can be dry, it can be repetitive to an extent, but it becomes important for you and I to read history and to look at the trends which have happened in history and to understand that, as we say in common language, that history repeats itself. And when you look at the history of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, this is evident. It's an evident fact that history definitely repeats itself from the time of Nabi Adam through all of the prophets, what they encountered with their communities, with the lies, the trickery, the deceit, with them being invited and then being rejected. We see the same thing even in the lives of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. And when we look at the life of Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam, we see similar trends. That how does it get that he's born in Medina and he ends up crossing all the way through Iraq, going into Iran, and not just in central Iran, but in a very remote region up in northeastern Iran? How does the Imam get all of that way, traversing thousands and thousands of kilometers? Well, I don't want to bore you with the entire history, but just in a nutshell, in a summary, we know that after Karbala, after the martyrdom of Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salam and the family and companions, the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, peace be upon all of them, they were under very difficult times. They were under direct and indirect surveillance. Literally, sometimes they couldn't even leave their home to go to the masjid without being under surveillance from the authorities of their time. They couldn't make the smallest of moves. They couldn't even freely speak to their companions sometimes. Which is why even we see when we talked about the 10th and 11th Imam, the way that they would interact with their followers would be in very covert ways to not draw the suspicion of the government of the time. And so after Karbala, because we know that after Amir al-Mu'mineen, his khilafat was taken away, he regained that caliphate for a few short years where the people came to him and asked him to lead them. After that point in history, none of the other Imams were given an opportunity to lead or to govern. Obviously, we accept our Imams, whether people give them the allegiance or not. Imamate is something given to them by Allah that nobody can take away. But the caliphate, that khilafat, that open leadership is something which was dependent on the people accepting and putting them into that position. And so we see that after Karbala, or after Amir al-Mu'mineen even, the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, the 4th Imam, the 5th Imam, the 6th Imam, their method of propagation, their method of preserving the identity of Ali Muhammad was not through government or power or leadership. It was through education. It was through having lectures and discourses and seminars and debates with people of other religions. But what began to happen at the time of, let's say, the 5th, 6th Imam going forward was a clash between the Bani Umayyah, the Umayyad dynasty, and the Abbasid dynasty. Two world superpowers, we can call them in our day-to-day language, that were fighting for power for the heart of Islam. And eventually this power struggle culminated in the fact that the Abbasid regime ended up bringing their power into authority, taking over the seat of authority, and becoming the so-called leaders of the Muslim community. And from here is where we saw that the pressure on the Ahlul Bayt began to take on a different form. And especially with the 8th Imam, what ends up happening is that he is politely invited, we can say, by Harun Rashid, and later on after his death, actually his son Ma'mun, to actually leave Medina and go towards what is present-day Iran. It was under the pretext of, we're family, because of the Abbasid government. They claimed affinity to Rasulullah, to the uncle of the Prophet. And so they said, we're from the same family, so why don't you join us in the land of the authority where the government is placed, and we'll take you, we'll support you, we'll assist you. And at the same time, obviously, as historians note, that they had their own agenda, their own plans of what they wanted from the 8th Imam. And what they actually wanted, as historians mention, was not to bring the 8th Imam to Khorasan, not to let him lead a life of luxury and comfort and ease and propagation of Islam, but it was to use his name, his fame, his glory, for them to solidify their position and their authority. And therefore, when the Imam was requested by force to leave Medina and to make the long and arduous trek towards Khorasan, that the Imam obviously realized, and the government realized, that this was a way for them to try to actually cement their authority over the hearts, especially of the Shia. And even if you look at it, and I'll just make this very brief, but if you look at even the journey that the Imam took when he left Medina, there are multiple routes that they could have taken, going through, for example, Kufa, going through Iraq, going to Mashhad. But the Abbasid government was very careful where they allowed the Imam to travel, because they knew if he went to Kufa, there was a base of support of the Shias in Kufa that would rally behind the Imam. If he went to Qum, at that time Qum was a small village, but it had supporters of Ahlul Bayt. And they knew that if the Imam was to make it through that region, that the people would again give their support to the Imam, and this would actually turn the tables on the Abbasid government. And so when you look at a map and you see the journey that the 8th Imam took, it became something very difficult actually for him, because they made him go out of the way to get to that region of Khorasan. And eventually, as he makes his way, he gets to a small village. Today it's a small city, but back then it was a small town or village called Nishapur. And this is where this very famous hadith, this golden chain hadith, comes. And I'll just mention it very briefly before I go into the main theme for tonight. So the Imam is going through all of these cities. He ends up in Nishapur. And we have to understand at that time, Iran was not a country run under a Shia government. It was general Muslims. So there were those who loved Ahlul Bayt, who followed them, who accepted them, and their walayat, their authority. But there were also a majority of those people in that region of Persia who did not accept the wilayat, the authority of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. But nonetheless, these were all great scholars in Islam. And when they heard that the grandson of Rasulullah is making his way through Nishapur, scholars of all persuasions rushed out to welcome this individual. We call him the Imam. They would not recognize him as the Imam, but they knew him as a grandson of Rasulullah. And so scholars and we were told that thousands and thousands of scholars flocked into the desert where the Imam was passing by on his caravan. And when he stopped, when the Imam sees all of these multitudes of people, with the permission of the head of the caravan, he stops for a brief minute. And all of these scholars have their pens and paper out, the utensils to write. And they ask the 8th Imam, they say, Yabna Rasulillah, O son of the Messenger of God, give us some tradition, some hadith, some saying that you have heard from your forefathers, going back to Rasulullah. Now these are people who have been Muslim for over 100 years. These were not people who were, just Muslim yesterday. These were great scholars, theologians, jurists, commentators of Quran. And so the Imam could have spoken about anything. He could have given any hadith. But what did he say? This hadith is known as the hadith of the golden chain, silsilatul dhahab. And the Imam comes out of the camel, the litter on top of the camel, and he makes a statement. He says that I've heard from my father, who heard from his father, from his father, going all the way back to Amir al-Mu'mineen, who heard from Rasulullah, who heard from the angel Jibra'il, who heard from Allah directly. And then the Imam says the hadith, he says that Allah has said, قَلِمَةُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ حِسْنِي فَمَنْ دَخَلَ حِسْنِي أَمِنَ مِنْ عَذَابِي. This phrase, La ilaha illallah, it's more than a phrase really, it's a statement that you and I make. But if we live by that phrase, that there is no God worthy of worship, worthy of serving other than Allah, then the Imam says that that phrase, that belief system in your life, Allah says that that is my fortress. And Allah says whoever enters into that fortress would be safeguarded from my punishment. Now it's important to realize again the context that these are Muslims. Hundreds, over 100 years, these people are worshiping Allah. They're praying, they're fasting, they're doing the Hajj. They've already said Shahadatain. They know these concepts. So why would the Imam stop and tell thousands of people, La ilaha illallah? It seems preposterous. It seems just, irrational why the Imam would say that. But then the Imam made a very profound statement. He stopped the sermon there with that one statement, and he says, بِشُرُوتِهَا وَأَنَا مِن شُرُوتِهَا. He says that La ilaha illallah, it's not as easy as just saying it and getting into Jannah and being safeguarded from the fire. He says it comes with a condition or with conditions. And he says, I am one of those conditions. Meaning that, and it's clear what the Imam was telling these thousands of scholars, that you can be a theologian, you can be a jurist, you can worship Allah your entire life, you can say La ilaha illallah, Muhammadun Rasulullah, but if you don't accept the wilayah of Ahlul Bayt, that shart, that condition of entering the fortress of Allah, then basically the Imam is showing us that all of your actions are deemed null and void. All of your good deeds, as other hadith tell us, that you could pray your entire life between the rukn and maqam, fast all day, pray all night, but if you don't have the wilayah of Ali and Ali, all of the actions are null and void. So the Imam was very clear to these multitudes of people and to us even today, 13 centuries later, that Islam, this fortress of Allah, this fortress of protection that Allah has given us, is not complete until you have the walayat of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. And as we've talked about in the past, that this fortress is what saves the ummah from being diverted, from being perplexed, from losing their way in Islam, from being at one of the extremes that we see in the world around us today. And so this is one of the legacies the Imam has left for us, that this fortress is something which we have to enter into, and we have to enter into it along with the mastership of the Prophet and his family and the 12 Imams, alayhimus salatu wassalam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the brief time that I have, I want to just go to a particular hadith that I wanted to speak about tonight, of a practical lesson that we can learn from the life of the 8th Imam. Again, the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, and all of them, all 14 infallibles, they're not just individuals that we put up on a pedestal, that we revere, that we love, with that superficial love. But rather we see that each and every one of them have left us teachings, sayings, words of wisdom, that were we to investigate into them and live by them in our lives, that many of the problems in our communities, in our families, in our society, many if not all of those problems would be removed from our midst. We would live in what we call this Dawlatun Karima, this ideal nation. But unfortunately, when we neglect the teachings of Ala Muhammad, when we look towards other ideologies and systems for guidance, and we this ideology, this ism, what's going to bring me happiness in the world, then that's where we slip as a community. where we slip as a family, and where our societies begin to falter. And so for the brief time I have, I want to look at a hadith on the importance of time management within Islam. You know, time management is something that all of us probably do, either, consciously or subconsciously. We all have apps on our smartphones to manage our day. We'll set, what time we have to go to work. When we have a business meeting, a luncheon, we have all of these things in our days. We'll program all of these into our calendars to make sure that we have time for everything within the day. And we have to do this because time is of the utmost importance. Unfortunately, as a community and as human society, we don't value time. We say a program will start at 8, and we know that it's 8 o'clock Muslim time. It's 8:15, it's 8:30, we're going to start at 8. And so when people have a majlis, they'll say 8 o'clock, but we're really going to start at 8:30. And so we all go at 8:30, right? And we go at 8:30, they start at 9. Unfortunately, this is a dilemma that we face, which we have to get out of this rut, that we have to be people who mean what we say. If we say we're going to be there at 8 or the program starts at 8, we start on time, whether there's one person or 100 people present. Time is so important. When I was looking at this in the Quran just today, that time is such an important concept in Islam, that Allah, Allah doesn't talk about just trivial things in the Quran. Whatever Allah talks about, it's for a reason. If Allah talks about the camel in the Quran, and He says, do you not see how the camel has been created? It's for a reason. But Allah in the Quran stresses on time so much. He takes an oath by time. Wal asr, I swear by the time. Wal fajr, I swear by the morning. Wal duha, I swear by the afternoon. Wal layli idha yaghsha, I swear by the night. So time is something that Allah holds important. He takes an oath by it in the Quran. He swears by it in the Quran. He tells us to, live our lives according to time. Allah tells us that salat, that our prayers are at preordained, pre-specified times. So time is important in Islam. And the eighth Imam shows us in this brief tradition I want to look at tonight of the importance of managing time within our lives. So we have the gadgets, we have the apps. They're smart, but we have to become smart enough to use these gadgets. We have to become smart enough to plan our day according to the Islamic schedule of life. And so how does the Imam begin this hadith? He says in the hadith, he says, strive and struggle to plan your day into 4 portions. Take your day not in 6-hour chunks, but take your day, take your week and plan it in portions that you need to manage your time in a better way. So take your time in the day, the 24 hours that you have, and manage that time accordingly. But how does the Imam say to manage that time? At the first stage, and we'll keep in mind now how the Imam tells us how to manage our time, and keep in mind the order of what the Imam is saying. The very first thing in this hadith the Imam says is your first time, your first portion of the day should be for munajat with Allah, to speak to Allah, to converse with Allah. Now this could either be a reference to the wajibat, the 5 daily prayers, or it could be in relation to the recommended prayers in Islam. Whether we look at it in either way, both are important. We know that as believers we have to pray on time every day. We can't say that I'm in a business meeting, I'm at work, I am doing this, I'm at school, I don't have time to pray. Yes, maybe you can't pray right at awwal time, right when the time sets in, but you have a time frame Allah has given us. And so for us to say, I can't pray dhuhr at work because I'm too busy, but you have time for lunch, you have time for coffee, you have time for this and that, to check your social media, then you have time for 5 minutes to go, leave your desk, and find a room to pray. This is not some foreign concept, especially in today's world. In the corporate world, even where I used to work, we had rooms for prayers established within our buildings. And yes, we wouldn't just walk up and leave at the time of adhan. We would go at a time when we could leave our work. But to say that I don't have time to pray, it becomes something that we're fooling ourselves perhaps. And the Imam shows us that you have to spend a portion of your day in communication with Allah. It's of the utmost importance to remember Allah. Yes, I can sit at my desk and do the dhikr of Allah, subhanallah, alhamdulillah. That's important as well. But also equally important is the actual prayers to Allah. But we have to appreciate that our day should not only be of the wajibat. Nobody in our day-to-day life, in our secular world, none of us are only content with the minimal. Meaning that if we have an opportunity at work to do some overtime, to make some extra money, we'll take that on. If we have one business, we want a second business. We make our first million, we want our second $1 million. We don't just say, well, I'm happy with my $80,000 a year. I'm not going to work harder. No, we work hard to make it more and more and more. We have two, Mercedes in the driveway, we want a third one. We have one home, we want a second home. So we're always wanting more and more in terms of our temporal world. But do we also want more and more in terms of our spiritual world? Yes, we can get to level 1 of Jannah. And inshallah, all of us will make it to at least level 1. But don't we want to strive for level 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 to be with the Ahlul Bayt alayhum as-salam? Maybe level 1 is enough. Whatever pleasures and bounties are there, maybe that's enough for us. But if there's an opportunity to do more and get closer to Allah, and not that we just worship Allah just for paradise, no, but because Allah deserves that worship. He's worthy of us submitting to Him. But if we have an opportunity in the temporal world to do better for ourselves, then we should also look at that from the spiritual point of view. Then why don't we try to better ourselves? Not just come, and do our 5 daily prayers, but make it a point to come to Thursday night majlis, to come to the waladat, to come to the shahadat majalis, come to the dua tawassul program, come to events where, I don't have time, but I'll make time for that event. Not just to do the wajibat, but try to go above and beyond and also fulfill some of the mustahab actions within our religion. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The Imam then in the second part of the hadith, after he says you've made that connection to Allah, the connection to the celestial has been solidified. You're making your obligations, you're fulfilling all of your wajibat to Allah. He then says that level 2 is ensure that your day-to-day sustenance is taken care of. A portion of your day now has to be reserved to go to work, to make a living, to make money. Islam is not of this notion that we're like a communist society or where we share our wealth and that you don't strive for attaining better in this world. No, Islam shows us that it is not only good, but it's a recommendation to do good in this world. To have a good paying job, to have a good career, to provide for the family, to have a spacious home, to be able to enjoy all of these bounties. This is not forbidden within Islam. Other religions might look at the pursuit of worldly pleasure as being a sin or to distract you from Allah, but Islam didn't come to say that, restrict yourself to worship and only pray and submit to God and don't think about your financial obligations. No, Islam came and told us in the hadith that if you leave the dunya for the akhirat or you leave the akhirat for the dunya, you're not of a follower of Ali Muhammad alayhi salam. And so we have to balance this. And so the Imam tells us the second portion of our day, it has to be for earning a permissible livelihood. And that's the key word though, is permissible. That we have to ensure when we go to university to get a degree, that what we're studying will allow us to go into a career path which is not something which is impermissible within Islam. If we have our own business, we have to make sure that what we are selling or how we're dealing is not in forbidden commodities and products. And you can refer to your marja to see what is haram and halal. They clearly delineate what are the limits of what a Muslim can interact with. There are certain things we know are completely forbidden. Alcohol is undoubtedly haram in any way or form or fashion, dealing with it in any way. But other things which may be haram for us to consume, there is some legal loophole we can say that allows us to interact with certain things. But you have to refer to your marja, your authority, to see where those limits are and follow them accordingly. Once we've maintained that connection to Allah, at the second level we've then maintained our career. We've been doing good for ourselves. We've been able to pay off our bills, take care of our families, help our centers flourish which are run on donations. Then the Imam comes to two very interesting points. At level 3, he says a very interesting thing. He says the third portion of your time, it should be spent hanging out with your brothers in Islam or your sisters in Islam. Hanging out with friends, who, not just a general friend, but a friend who actually means good for you. They're there to point out your shortcomings, your defects. They're there to help you along the way to Allah. Because we have different kinds of friends we can have. You know, sometimes we have friends that work, colleagues that we work with. Maybe our children at school, they have friends and acquaintances. At one level, that's okay. They can play with their friends in the playground. Maybe their friends from school come over. Maybe you go to their home and you play video games, go and play sports together, those sorts of things. That's not a problem. But there's a different level of friendship in Islam. There's a level where you have acquaintances, you meet them at school, they're your co-workers, you might go out for a coffee, maybe out for lunch together. But then the Imam is showing us there's another level of friends in Islam, where these are, first of all, those of your same religion. They're Muslims. Not just any Muslim, because we know, unfortunately, we live in a world where not every Muslim is a good Muslim. And it's an unfortunate reality that just having a friend doesn't necessarily mean that you are on the right path. And so the Imam actually clarifies the statement and says, those Muslims who are trustworthy, who you can put your trust in, they're reliable, they mean good for you, they want what is best for you deep down inside. And they're going to be there to tell you when you're doing something wrong. You know, that's what Islam is looking for in a friend. And when they spend a portion of your time with these sorts of friends, it's because they're going to get us closer to Allah. If they see me doing something, that sort of a friend will be quick to tell me in a polite way, obviously, enjoining the form of enjoining the good and forbidding evil. What you're doing is perhaps not the right thing you should be doing. Change it up a bit. You know, if you're doing something good, they'll encourage you to continue in that goodness. But to have that kind of a friend and to spend time with them, actually the eighth Imam shows us, is a part of Islam. It's a part of life. It's a part of communication and closeness to Allah. And so, you know, sometimes parents might get into this rut where they don't want their children to have fun and play with friends and play sports and maybe play video games. They want them to be academic and studying all the time. And that's also good in and of its own. But the eighth Imam is showing us, spend some time. Have friends. Have friends from your own community who will help you connect to Allah. Maybe they're friends and you'll hang out at the mosque together, you'll play sports together, or maybe the center will have a movie night or something, and the youth will come together. And at Adhan time, they'll say, you know what, let's stop the game, or stop the movie, it's prayer time, let's go pray together. They'll be careful of one another, they won't use foul language, they'll be there to look out for one another. Because as the eighth Imam says, these are people who are trustworthy, they're reliable. They want good deep down inside. They definitely want good for you. And you can't find that except in those who follow your ideology. So yes, we can have friends outside of Islam. They're at one level of that friendship. But the true friendship, that where you can actually, connect and really relate to one another, are those who follow your set of teachings, who you pray together with, who you can break fast together with, who you can do all of these acts of worship together with. And so the Imam shows that the third level is to ensure that you spend time hanging out with friends. Just as you take time to pray and go to work, take some time to have friends and interact with them and to have a good time once you have fulfilled your obligations. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And last but not least, from this beautiful hadith of the eighth Imam on time management, is he says that your last portion or one portion of your day should be spent in legitimate pleasures, in those things which are permissible within Islam, that are fun, that are pleasing to do, that again will connect you back with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, we see that Islam is not just about praying, what we think about as praying. As ibadat, as we think about on the prayer mat, you have to pray and you have to do this and that. Yes, that is worship. But also Islam and the eighth Imam is showing us that having fun, permissible fun, is a form of worship to Allah. So when young men get together and play basketball, yes, they're playing basketball, but it's not a waste of time. If they're doing it to connect to one another, to strengthen the bonds of a community, then that basketball becomes as important as Fajr namaz. It's as important as going to work. It's as important as any other act of worship. When a husband and wife spend some time going to the park, going on vacation together, walking or going for dinner together, it's not a waste of time. It's not a waste of money. It's a permissible act, and it earns reward from Allah. You know, there's so many traditions that talk about when a husband helps his wife at home doing, things around the house. And hopefully the men are listening. When you go home, you're going to help your wife at home. Not just, I heard that on the minbar, but I'm not going to help my wife. No, there's hadith that when you help your wife at home, it's an act of worship. It's ibadat. Your sins are being removed. Amir al-Mu'mineen, though he was such a busy man, and you've all heard the life of Imam Ali. He would work outside. He would work. At one time he worked for a Jewish man in his orchard as a farmer. Imam Ali worked, labor jobs. He wasn't afraid and embarrassed to work. But Imam Ali would work 8-10 hours in the day. He would be with Rasulullah writing down the revelation. But guess what? When he came home and he saw Lady Zahra alayhi salam grinding wheat to make flour to bake bread, he would be there to sweep the home. Today we just take out our vacuum and we vacuum, you're done in a few minutes. He would literally pick up the broom and sweep the floor while Lady Zahra alayhi salam would cook the food. He would take care of the kids, play with the children while the food was being cooked. He would go and do so many acts around the home. He wasn't embarrassed. He could say, I'm the Imam. I'm the grandson of the Prophet. I'm a man of authority. Who are you to tell me what to do? But he was a servant in the home. He took care of the family. It wasn't that it was beneath his status. No, that was his status. That's why he is the commander of the faithful. That's why he is Imam al-Muttaqeen. He's the Imam, the leader of those with piety. Because to worship doesn't mean you just pray to Allah. Anybody can get into a routine of praying to Allah. It's easy. But to work at home and to serve your family, to help around with cooking and cleaning and doing errands and getting things done around the home, that takes a man. And Imam Ali showed us that that is what a man is. And Imam Ar-Ridha shows us that don't be embarrassed to do this. This is a part of Islam. To do these sorts of things, to have fun is Islamic. To go out for walks is Islamic. To play sports is Islamic. To have fun within the confines, again, of Islamic law, maintaining the limits of men and women and what's allowed and not allowed. Once those are maintained, then go for it. Have fun in life. And when we go to the last part of the hadith, it's very interesting what the Imam says. He says through that last portion of having fun, that legitimate pleasure, he says you'll be able to take care of everything else in your life. So if you don't have time to pray, maybe you don't have enough time to play. So if you have time to play, then you're going to have time to pray in life. If you find you don't have time to, you're a workaholic, you don't have time for anything else, the Imam is saying make sure you have some time for pleasure. That pleasure time will allow you to now find time to worship Allah, to get to work. It'll give you time to have connections with friends. And not just social media where you're tweeting and Facebooking, but no, actually having real human friends that you interact with on a physical basis. The Imam clearly shows us in this hadith, that last portion, having fun, he says you take care of that aspect of life and everything else will fall into place. You'll have time for everything else in life. But if you don't have time for pleasure, if you don't have time for your spouse, you don't have time for your children are growing up in front of a screen, your wife is, she doesn't see you because you work 12 hours a day, you leave before she wakes up, you're home when she goes to bed. If you're leading that kind of a life, then the Imam shows us that that's not going to be a life. That's not going to be something productive in your life. You're not going to find time to love to worship Allah, to speak to Allah, to enter into conversation with Allah. You won't have time for any of these things. And so yes, we have to have that balance in life, but we also have to appreciate that everything, when it's done within its limits, it's Islamic, it's permissible, it's a part of our religion, and it will earn us a reward in this world and in the world to come. And had that not been the case, then the 8th Imam would not have said this hadith, to divide your time into 4, to ensure that Allah has a portion of your time, to ensure that your work, your career has a part of your time, to ensure that your friends are a part of your day-to-day life. And last but not least, that your pleasures, your spouse is there, your children are there, your extended family is there. And inshallah, if we can take care of all of these 4 things, as the Imam says, then we'll be able to lead a wholesome and healthy and balanced lifestyle. We'll be able to be Muslims who are following the right path. We'll be able to be those worthy of being called of the adherents of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. And we'll be able to, inshallah, have their ziyarat in this world. And more importantly, we'll be able to benefit from their shafa'at in the world to come. We close and we ask Allah, on this blessed night that we mark the birth anniversary of Imam Ali ibn Musa Ar-Ridha alayhi salam, that he accepts this small act of worship from us this evening. We ask Allah, we sincerely ask Allah that we are all given the tawfiq to make it to Mashhad, to pay our respects to Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam directly. We ask Allah to give us all the ability to visit all of the Ma'sumin alayhim salam. We ask Allah to forgive us our sins, to keep each and every one of us and our families and our children and our spouses on the path of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. And we ask Allah that we do not leave this world until we see the advent of our 12th Imam, Imam Al-Hujjah, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. Rabbana taqabbal minna innaka anta as-sami'ul alim. Let us close by remembering again the marhumin, the deceased from our families, our communities, our friends. Many of us in this room have loved ones who were with us last year at this same time and who are no longer with us. Let us remember all of them, all of the deceased from our families, the ulama who have left this world, the many shuhada who have been killed in many countries around the world, in Iraq, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in many other parts of the world. Let's remember all of them this evening with the Surah Al-Mubarakatul Fatiha. But before that, one loud salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.